Thank you, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. Madam Secretary, would you please call roll?
Assemblyman DeLong.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman. Here. Assemblyman De Silva. Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblyman Hibbets. Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblyman Cameron C.H. Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brittany Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Assemblywoman Newby.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager. Chair Gorlow.
Here. Having a little difficulty with my button. Thank you very much. And please mark those that are missing present when they arrive. I believe education's running a little behind. Welcome everyone in Carson City. Looks like we've got a couple people in Las Vegas as well, and hopefully we've got some people joining us online. Today we have hearings on Assembly Concurrent Resolution 3 and Assembly Bill 243 and one committee BDR introduction. But before we get started, there's a few housekeeping announcements we'd like to make. First, please make sure to silence all electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the door or provide a business card to the committee. And when testifying, please turn on your microphone, speak slowly, your name, and also spell it for the record. Also state whether you represent a group or an organization, then turn off the microphone each time you are done speaking. There are hard copies of the meeting materials available for the public at the door. We also have electronic copies available online. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during our meetings, so even if we do not agree on something, please respect the other person's position. And committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents. Please do not take this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting. Each person will be limited to 2 minutes. In addition, the public may submit written testimony and provide it to the committee secretary up to 24 hours after the meeting. And with that, we will get started. I'm actually going to do the bill draft request introduction first. It's BDR 387, and it expresses support for the Lake Tahoe Transportation Action Plan. As a reminder, members, your vote in favor of introducing the BDR does not imply a commitment to support the measure later. All this does is allow the BDR to become a bill and enter the legislative hearing process. I will entertain a motion to introduce BDR 387. Do I have a motion? I have one from Assemblywoman Gonzalez, a second from Assemblyman DeLong. Any discussions on the motion? No? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay? Great, the motion carries. Thank you very much. I will now open the hearing on Assembly Concurrent Resolution 3. This measure directs the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Growth and Infrastructure to conduct a study of the laws administered by the Nevada Transportation Authority and the Taxicab Authority. We have today, it looks like Director Terry Reynolds, Department of Business and Industry. And in Las Vegas, I believe we have a Mr. Todd Park, Chief of Enforcement from Nevada Transportation Authority, a Ms. Jennifer DeRose, Deputy Commissioner with the Nevada Transportation Authority, and Carl Armstrong, Administrator with the Taxicab Authority. So when you are ready, go ahead and state your name and spell it for the record and begin when you're ready.
Great. Terry Reynolds, Director for the Department of Business and Industry. That's TerryReynolds. To my left is my Deputy Director, Mr. Perry Fagan. He will help me, assist me in this one with the PowerPoint presentation. I'd like to make an opening statement before I go into the presentation and kind of how we got here to ACR 3. ACR 3 is the product of the discussion with the subcommittee reviewing the two agencies of business and industry, the Taxi Authority and the Nevada Transportation Authority. For the past several administrations and legislative sessions, there has been discussions regarding consolidation of these two agencies. The agencies perform some of the basic administrative functions, but are very different in their approach and the industries they regulate. During the Sunset Subcommittee testimony, we recommended that the legislature consider an interim study, ACR 3, to review the laws and regulations that were enacted over 50 years ago under the motor carrier statutes to govern these two regulatory agencies. The basic mission of providing clean, reliable, on-demand public transportation has not changed, but the industry and the methods of delivery have, with the advent of new forms of transportation, i.e. TNCs and autonomous vehicles. The companies now operating in the industry. Our laws and regulations have not kept up with the industry on the public expectations of service. The industry is vital to our tourism, entertainment, and gaming industry and should be modernized to meet the needs of our growing state and traveling public. With that introduction, I'd like to go through and kind of give some of the overview of those agencies and some of the issues that we face with them. First slide is jurisdiction authority of the TA and NTA. And I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I'll summarize, go through, leave more time for questions. The Taxi Authority and the Nevada Transportation Authority are created and empowered by statutes under Chapter 706 Motor Carriers of the NRS. The NTA enforces also 706 and 706B, which is autonomous vehicles. The motor carrier section of NRS, and just for a prop, I'll show you, is approximately 80 pages in the NRS. It dates back to 1971 and has amendments through it up until 2017. The NTA oversees several license types, but most pertinent, they regulate every Nevada taxi cab outside of Clark County and every TNC, Transportation Network Companies, Uber and Lyft, driver in the state. See slide 4, we'll go into that. The TA regulates the taxi cabs of Clark County and has concurrent jurisdiction over TNCs in a limited circumstance under 706A.280, and I'll go into why that is the case. The NTA's authority is broader, has police power than the TA, with additional statutes outlined under NRS 289. Neither the TA nor the NTA peace officers are considered law enforcement officers under NRS 179B.070. They are compliance enforcement officers limited to enforcing NRS 706, 706A, and 706B. The motor carrier statutes and regulations were initially added in 1971, and the TNC was authorized under 706A.280, and regulations were adopted in 2015. As I indicated, there's 80 pages of statutes under there. On slide 3, you'll see the various statutes that we go under for both the NTA and the TA. Differences between the two agencies. Taxi Cab Authority, as I stated, is only in Clark County. The NTA regulates taxis all counties except Clark County and also regulates limos, shuttles, tow cars, and in-state movers. If you look at page 9, there's a full list of what they regulate on there. Taxi has a dispatch function and conducts patrols in key transportation areas by using a fleet of law enforcement vehicles capable of conducting traffic stops, directing passenger traffic at large event venues, and establishing a visible presence at transportation hubs. Taxi can cite gypsy cabs either administratively or criminally. NTA does not have a direct authority to cite off-app gypsy transports. I find that surprising. That off-app unpermitted rides are otherwise unregulated, and many involve persons who cannot qualify to obtain a TA permit or pass TNC screening due to criminal background, increasing the potential for additional crimes against passengers and inadequate insurance protection. NTA has an administrative hearing and application process as outlined in NAC. The TA has a 5-member board appointed by the governor. They are paid by the meeting, and they hold their administrative hearings. The NTA has 3 salaried commissioners on appeal. NTA has 3 salaried commissioners appointed by the governor. The TA collects revenue through trip revenue, medallion fees, and a technology fee collected on trips. NTA collects revenue through various fees, albeit small, TNC licensing fee assessments paid by the companies, and is allocated state highway funds. this dates back to the old motor carrier beginnings of the NTA. The major functions of both agencies, going to slide 5, administration, they all have legal, fiscal, administrative support, and IT. Enforcement, compliance, and investigations, vehicle inspections. NTA does not inspect the vehicles. They don't do what I say mechanical inspections, but they do make sure that they have the basic components are what they're required to under the law. Licensing and records to include both driver and vehicle licensing. NTA does not license TNC drivers. The company is licensed. Hearings, they both have a hearing process for violations, application, policy, and regulations. The Taxi Cab Authority, established under 706, the Taxi Cab Authority was authorized in 71 under the motor carrier statutes, and its duties were further codified in the legislature in 73 and also in 1997. Since the initial authorization in 71-73, changes have been made to the original mission and structure has remained basically the same. The TA has no specific grant of police powers under NRS 289 is specifically enumerated as a Category 2 agency. Its compliance enforcement officers historically perform following duties commonly associated with Category 1 officers. They have routine patrol, they have criminal investigations, they enforce traffic laws, and investigation of motor vehicle accidents, which depending on the type of accident, which ranges probably around 600 a year, different accidents. The vehicle inspectors will go out in the field to do those. Those are the minor accidents that really are fender bender type things. The TA does routine patrol, conducts traffic stops, has a dispatch function, and dispatch their enforcement investigators as first responders to criminal investigations. Taxi Authority has 16 cab companies, 3,530 medallions, over 6,000 drivers. Kind of a new advent over the last several years is lease cabs. We have 1,051 lease cabs. Lease cabs can have multiple drivers, so they can drive in shifts. And so you could have up to 3 drivers on that. TA vehicle inspects taxis, approximately 5,000 vehicles. Those standards were loosened to allow, because it allowed them to keep more taxis in service, because the inspection process is pretty intense. They inspect, when I say they inspect, they go through, they look at the brakes, they look at the inside, outside, they look at the engine, they look at the structural portion of the frames in there. It's a full inspection. The Nevada Transportation Authority operations, the NTA, though having broad police powers under 289.30, only conducts 2 types of field investigations: foot patrol, surveillance, and sting operations for TNC drivers who are off app or who do not have the proper trade dress visible. The citations for these 2 violations do not have specific fine amounts authorized under NRS or NAC. Current practice is to hold a hearing before the commissioners on the citation or the impoundment if it's not a legal vehicle. And if violation is found, to notify the company so that the TNC can discipline the driver. As I stated on page 9, this is an overview of all the active certificates and permits for the NTA. TNC regulations. Regulatory compliance audits, which were mandated by the NTA when the TNC regulations were adopted in 2015, are done twice a year. 10% of the active drivers per year chosen randomly, and it ranges between 5 and 10%, which amounts now to about 3,000 drivers. Any violations found, citations are issued, and after a hearing, fines are assessed. TNC obligations to NTA regulations, yearly submission of gross operating revenue. That's what they base the regulatory assessment on. There's a notification of crashes involving drivers or autonomous vehicle providers. Must provide proof of insurance with proper coverage limits. On page 11 and 12 of the presentation, you'll see what excuse me, the driver requirements are for taxi cab and for rideshare. So I wanted to show you the dichotomy between the 2. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I think that it is time to go through and look at the regulations that govern that. They have developed and been layered essentially over the last 50 years with both taxis and the NTA. The industry has changed considerably. We see the fact that in terms of the difference with drivers, the difference in the types of companies that are coming in. We have national companies that have come in. We have companies that now operate much differently than what it was, where you had basically family operations owning cab companies coming into the area. So the industry is changing. We're also going to see the advent of autonomous vehicles. We have probably in the next few years, we have Motional and Zeus going to be operating. They're experimenting on the Strip right now to get their field operations done so they can operate their autonomous vehicles. We have also Halo that operates kind of a rideshare type program where they park cars and you can take it for a period of time. So we have different forms of transportation. And I see that extending and changing over the next 5 to 10 years. One of the things that we're seeing now is that taxi rides went from probably around 6 million rides in 21 or 22, excuse me, and we're up to 6 million, over 6 million rides in 21. In 22, we went to over 13 million. And this year, we're on track to do, depending on what happens, tourism industry, but we're on track to do over 15 million rides. So that ranges to about anywhere from 1.2 million to 1.5 million a month in rides. Now, if you compare that against the airport statistics, we're looking at record numbers of deplane people coming into the airport. In January alone, we averaged about 420,000 a week passenger deplaning at the airport. So you can see the need for transportation. We had one day in October of almost 100,000 people deplaned at the airport. So you see the need for that. We get the statistics every month from Reed and also from the Reno Airport, and to look at what the passenger levels are. But we know that from the lines at the airport and from the complaints that we receive about timely intercept of passengers coming into the airport, that we need all the transportation, public transportation that we can get. So that's why I think it's important to look at how we can improve the licensing, the ability of people to get out in the to provide public transportation, but also providing a safe, clean form of transportation for people that come into our community. So with that, thank you, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Committee members, I'm going to start with Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for the presentation. A question for you: with the advent of the boring companies' underground transportation sort of network there, is that at all regulated by either of these two entities? Or if not, why? Or is there thought of regulating it through that?
Assemblywoman Newby, thank you for the question. Terry Reynolds for the record. Right now, they do not charge for that. Those rides are free, so there's basically, and it's limited transportation. If they start charging for that and providing that as a regular charge service, they would come under the laws of 706, and they would be regulated. So one of the things I think that we can use that form of transportation to get people, to move people, but we need much more than that. And so, is it going to serve a good purpose for the community? Yes, it is. Is it needed? Yes, it is. But will it provide all the transportation needs that we need on the interior area of the core area for the gaming area, casino area? No, it will not.
So then anticipating that at some point they are going to be charging, would this study then anticipate that in your review of regulations and laws?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, yes, it would be. Yes.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Does anyone else have questions? It has to be quick, though, Assemblywoman.
Okay,
I'm teasing.
thank you. No, I just have to ask, where is the one-horse-drawn vehicle located?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, I'm going to defer that to Mr. Parks, who is in the audience down in in the speaker room in Las Vegas.
That is a fantastic question. And luckily, a couple weeks ago, I made sure that they were compliant, and you'll be happy to know that they are compliant and have their current insurance, which is really the only thing that we regulate on that company. But they're here in Las Vegas.
Oh,
I hope
cool.
that answers your question.
So they have to be in charge of their own pooper scooper, right?
Well, I guess we don't regulate that part. We don't, maybe I should put it this way. We don't regulate that end.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
You're very welcome. Assemblyman Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for sharing all of this information with us. Just a question regarding kind of the future as we look at continual increase in need for public transportation within the state. What do you see some of the biggest challenges, or do you have an idea of what you're projecting is challenges that we might need to start thinking about or planning for?
Thank you, Assemblyman Miller. Terry Reynolds, for the record. There's a couple things I think that are great challenges for us. One is that we still have issues in the outlying areas. So if you're in Summerlin or Green Valley and you're living there and you're trying to get a form of transportation to get to the airport or to get somewhere, it's still difficult. Most of our public transportation modes are limited to really the core area of the gaming areas and probably 6 or 7 blocks off of that. So I usually stay off strip, and it's a little bit of a wait to get an Uber or Lyft driver or even a cab. So you know, that's one issue that we hear of quite a bit. The second issue is making sure that because a lot of our facilities were built in the community, not anticipating different forms of public transportation. They were developed to have cab stands, cab lines, and if you've been to a stadium event or a T-Mobile event or even at the airport, they're not designed to be able to handle the type of traffic that they have and the queuing that they need to be able to efficient to pick up passengers. So I think that's one of the things that that we really need to have some planning for and to think about how we're going to be doing that. And then you're going to get electric vehicles. You're going to get, and then they're going to have charging areas and ability to move back and forth. There is a company now that's using electric vehicles and working on their charging. With the advent of better batteries and longer charging times, you're going to see that. But we're going to need to plan for the types of transportation that we see within the community and the queuing that we need to be able to efficiently move passengers.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Does anybody else have questions? Oh. I have a quick question. Oh, never mind. Assemblyman Hibbets, you can go first.
Thank you, Chair. So, bottom line, what is this study we're doing? You've already identified the problems. Why are we doing a study to study the study to identify problems?
Mr. Hibbets, thank you. That's an excellent question, and happy to answer that. Terry Reynolds, for the record, Director for Business and Industry. I think it's important to get the views from the stakeholders, the casino properties, the owners of the company. They've been living with these regulations that have been stacked on each other for like 50 years. There's things that I think that we can do in terms of streamlining the process for licensing, for getting drivers licensed, to be able to get cars on the road, to be able to how we, because we regulate everything from floor mats to size of lettering to numbers on the vehicles to just about every process. We even tell them how they need to do their accounting processes in the company. And so that's kind of an interesting dichotomy. So there's a lot of things that we really need to address and get into a forum where we can get feedback from the public, we can get feedback from the stakeholders of the industry, and from the properties and areas that they serve within the community. So that's why. And I think if we do that, I think we'll come up with a much better product for our public transportation within our cities.
And how much is this going to cost?
Terry Reynolds, for the record, also a good question. We haven't determined that yet. I think that'll be determined through Legislative Council Bureau in terms of how they, what the cost of interim committees are. In terms of the industry, I hope we will be able to save costs for them and be able to do a better process for licensing and getting vehicles out on the street or whatever type of mode of vessel of transportation that is out there, because companies are investing literally hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to get different apps for getting to passengers, to be able to getting autonomous vehicles, to getting electric vehicles, to get those out into the public arena, to get affordable transportation. So I think that they would welcome this process, and I think they're looking at the ability to cut their costs, and we're looking at a more efficient process to be able to do that, and to be able to look at how we can better assist them in our regulations.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I have a quick question. So would you say that these regulations are old?
This is Terry Reynolds. I think there are when they're talking about everything from ashtrays to to floor mats to now we have what we call wrapped vehicles where they have the advertisement wrapped around the vehicle. You have an issue here about about numbering and advertising on the top of the vehicles when you can wrap a vehicle, and we have a lot of the buses within the community. RTC wraps their vehicles, wraps their buses with advertising and promotion. So yes, we need to come into the new century.
So these were developed in 1971 and they're old.
They're over 50 years old. 52
Yeah, I was
years
born
old.
in 1971.
Yeah.
I walked you down that, sorry. But I do actually have a question. That this study is supposed to be taking place during the next biennium. So how long do you think the study will actually need time-wise?
From my experience, Terry Reynolds for the record, my experience on Chair Gorlow on interim committees is that we're probably looking at probably 4 to 6 months.
Thank you for that.
That's an estimation.
So, committee, last call for questions. Okay, seeing none, thank you so very much, Director
Great.
Reynolds.
Thank you.
And with that, we will call anyone who would like to offer testimony in support. This is ACR 3. Please again state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Wiz Rizard. I'm the Deputy State Director with Americans for Prosperity in Nevada. We definitely like to support ACR 3. I think Mr. Reynolds did a really good job on laying out why it's important to bring about some transparency and openness about some laws that have been on the books that have restricted the industry from moving forward, and more importantly, allowing emerging markets to start to put a foothold in Nevada as well. We're growing, and I think we need to diverse our economy, and I think part of that is transportation, and we support this bill, and we look forward to following this study and hopefully partnering with you all to see what regulations we can remove, fees we can reduce to ensure that small or big businesses can come in and provide great services to our community. So we urge you to support this bill, and we greatly appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Is there anyone else in Carson City who would like to testify in support? Okay, seeing none. Las Vegas, would either of you like to testify in support? Nope. I think you're presenting.
This is Carl Armstrong. I don't think so. We pretty much said everything that we need to say at this particular point, and we look forward to working with you in terms of getting our regulations and our laws in sync at this point.
Great. Thank you very much. Broadcasting, is there anybody on the telephone who would like to testify in support?
Chair, there are no callers to testify at this time.
Thank you very much. We'll go on to opposition. Is there anybody in Carson City who would like to testify in opposition of ACR 3? Seeing none, is there anybody in Las Vegas who would like to come to the table to testify in opposition of ACR 3? Okay, seeing none. Broadcasting, is there anybody on the telephone?
Chair, there are no callers to testify at this time.
Okay, we'll move on to neutral. Is there anybody in Carson City who would like to come to the table to testify in neutral? Seeing none. Do I have somebody in Las Vegas? Looks like I do. Please state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin when ready.
Certainly. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Maxon Rushton, R-U-S-H-T-O-N. I am the Executive Director of the Livery Operators Association. And the members of the Livery Operators Association are a combination of limousine operators, scenic tour operators, charter bus operators, and taxi operators that operate in Nevada statewide. All commercial transportation companies that are regulated by either the Nevada Transportation Authority or the Taxi Cab Authority. In addition to being their counsel, I was previously the chairman of the now Nevada Transportation Authority. Between 2003 and 2007, I served on the NTA, and I will tell you that from the time that I joined the NTA until the time I left, legislative committees such as yours studied the combination or the consolidation of the two agencies, and on each of those occasions decided after a lengthy legislative study to not combine the agencies. And the reason is because many of the issues that were previously raised are regulations, not statutes. Those regulations are easily addressed and identified pursuant to a regulatory workshop that can be held by the respective agencies in which the industry has the potential to participate and make the changes that they deem necessary. Statutorily, there are some antiquated statutes that probably need to be reviewed by a legislative committee because they not only overlap with one another, but they overlap with other agencies such as the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Department of Taxation. There's also some inconsistencies within the statutes that could be cleaned up. But overall, the agencies in their autonomy with one another have served the state well, have served the industry well, and most importantly, ensure the protection of our traveling public. I would respectfully submit that the study is not necessary, but that instead a cursory and a very complete review of all of the regulations just to ensure that those that are antiquated that were previously noted by Director Reynolds are cleaned up and the agency is, or the industry is able to progress forward into the 21st century with new technology and standards that allow them to grow and operate, but without compromising the importance of the safety. And with that, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone that has questions? And could you please, I guess I have a question. Could you clarify, are you in neutral or opposition? Because some of your testimony kind of sounded like you wanted some changes. So we can reclassify if you would like.
Certainly, Chairman and members of the committee, for the record, Kimberly Maxon Rushton. I'm specifically addressing the language in ACR 3, which talks about moving forward and looking at the development of the technology and the industries going forward. I don't have any objection to that and to stand in a neutral position. What I do object to is the a study that focuses solely on the consolidation of the two respective agencies. So I believe that that's separate than what's specifically outlined in ACR 3, but defer to the chair if you'd like to, if you believe that my testimony is more opposition than it is neutral.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I do think it's a little bit more on the opposition side, so we'll classify it as that. But we appreciate your testimony, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is
Thank
there-
you.
Is there anyone else in Las Vegas who would like to testify? Okay, seeing none. Broadcasting, we'll go to the telephones. Is there anyone who'd like to testify in neutral?
Chair, there are no callers to testify at this time.
Thank you very much. Director Reynolds, would you like to say any closing thoughts and remarks?
Terry Reynolds for the record. Thank you for the opportunity to address this body. In regard to ACR 3, we agree with, and we have had discussions over the years about consolidation. We think that there, from a perspective of the administrator for BNI, the department director, we feel that this is really about modernizing our regulations, getting rid of those regulations that are really do not apply, that have been added on over the last 50 years. This is not a plea for consolidation. We think that they have two separate missions. So we would agree with Ms. Rushton as to her comments from that perspective. But we feel that there is a need to modernize the statutes and the regulations. There is a lot in NRS as well as our regulations that really needs to come into the 21st century. There are a lot of things that we find and we hear from the industry that are burdensome to them. So we are looking at ways that we can streamline our processes and make it more effective for them to be able to operate, to get drivers on the road, or to get their vehicles on the road to be able to meet the needs of the traveling public. And right now, we really need to work on making sure that we have enough public transportation for the people visiting our communities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. And with that, we will close the hearing on ACR 3. I will now open the hearing on Assembly Bill 243. This measure revises provisions related to legislative affairs. Our Vice Chair, Assemblywoman Miller, will be presenting. We'll give her a couple minutes to get set up. Whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the Legislative Operations and Elections Committee. I'm Brittany Miller, and I'm the Assemblywoman for Assembly District 5 in Clark County. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present Assembly Bill 243 to you today. This bill revises provisions related to legislative affairs, specifically the legislature's interim activities. As you know, the legislature is only in session for 120 days every odd number year. However, during the interim period between legislative sessions, interim committees of the legislature still meet to study certain issues and formulate recommendations for the next legislative session. During the 2021 session, the legislature passed AB 443, which significantly changed the interim committee structure of the legislature. The bill repealed several existing statutory interim committees and formed new joint interim standing committees that paralleled those of our standing committees. For example, it is this joint interim standing committee on legislative operations and elections which voted to draft the bill that I'm presenting to you today. Assembly Bill 443 also imposed new requirements, in particular, those regarding membership, quorum, and legislative commission oversight for the joint interim committees that differ from those of the interim committees. Again, primarily, we aligned the interim committees with the standing committees that happened during the regular session. The previous legislative interim was the first time that the legislature was operating under this new structure. And of course, there's a few lessons that we learned, as we always do the first time we do anything. And Assembly Bill 243 basically seeks to fix and address some of those oversights so that we have a smoother implementation as we go further. So basically, Assembly Bill 243 is in fact a cleanup bill. So the bill summary is, there's 6 major components that Assembly Bill 243 seeks to address. First is it clarifies the vacancy of a chair for the Joint Interim Standing Committee. If there is a vacancy, the vice chair shall become acting chair until the chair is appointed. Secondly, the bill clarifies that if a regular member of a Joint Interim Standing Committee cannot meet the meeting, then the alternate member that attends the members must be, to the extent possible, of the same political party. Interesting enough, sometimes there's different votes depending on party. I know that's a little strange in this building. I see the shock on some of my colleagues' faces, but we want to keep it consistent with the party of the person that's vacant. Third, the bill proposes transferring the duties that require to evaluate and review issues relating to governmental purchasing from the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Government Affairs. That's because Nevada Revised Statutes 218E.330 provides that a Joint Interim Standing Committee may evaluate and review issues within the jurisdiction of its corresponding standing committee, and governmental purchasing has typically fallen under government affairs in both the Senate and the Assembly. AB 443, though, however, had a specific carve-out to allow interim leg ops to evaluate and review issues relating to governmental purchasing. This bill basically transfers it back to government affairs where it's more appropriately settled. It also required a report be submitted to interim leg ops. That report, typically known as the Nevada Public Purchasing Study Commission, also requires that it will be sent to government affairs. The bill also repeals the requirement that the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services has to review regulations for health care policy. This requirement is outdated and redundant, and it's because before the Legislative Commission had the authority to approve the regulations, the Leg Committee on Healthcare would review regulations relating to healthcare, and then the duty was rolled over to the Joint Interim Standing Committee on HHS. However, now that the Legislative Commission can approve regulations, again, it is no longer necessary. And another thing to notice is that currently, Health and Human Services is actually the only interim committee that is responsible for reviewing regulations. So for instance, if you're on the Education Interim Committee, if a law was passed during the session, then when, say, Nevada Department of Education or the board comes up with regulations, policies, and procedures to match that legislation, it doesn't come back to interim ed to approve it. So again, all of those would go through Leg Commission, so there's no reason to have just HHS carved out on its own. Also, Assembly Bill 243 revises the date that a teacher who wishes to serve on the Nevada State Teacher Recruitment and Retention Advisory Task Force, a bill that I wrote and passed in 2019, that we have some dates that, what happens right now is they are required, teachers who want to be on that task force are required to submit their application by January 15th. The Interim Education Committee is required to appoint members by February 1st. So you can see that's like a 2-week window. And NDE goes through really a very exhaustive process to make sure that all the teachers who apply are qualified and making sure that they give a very robust list. I think last year it might have been over 100 names of people in the state that qualify. So again, that 2-week window is extremely too small. So we're asking to move that date up to December 1st of the odd number year, so that teachers will then submit their applications by December 1st, and then the Interim Committee on Education will have that time until February 1st. Also, one thing that I did submit as a conceptual amendment, and I don't believe it's on Nellis yet, but it's that legislators that serve their last term, whether based on term limits or just not seeking reelection to continue serving in the legislature, shall not be selected as chair or vice chair of any interim committee. And that's simply because the whole intent of the interim committees are to prepare for the regular sessions. And so someone that's termed out, that's not the appropriate spot for them to be kind of directing the conversation and the studies that go on. And so with that, like I said, AB 243 is basically a cleanup bill, and there's a handful of just basic common sense changes, things that we noticed that were happening under the new structure, and that, again, all of this that I presented today was approved by the interim Legislative Standing Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections, because of course we moved it forward and voted to approve it as a BDR. So with that, Chair Gorlow, I conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Our first question is going to come from Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for the presentation, Assemblywoman Miller. I did notice that there was a suggested amendment on Nellis from Reva Crump. Is that considered, do you want me to read it?
Please.
Please consider deleting in lines 16, 17, 18, if a regular member of a joint interim standing committee cannot attend a meeting of the committee, the alternate member who attends the meeting must, to the extent practicable, be of the same political party as the regular member. I submit, this is Reva, or Ms. Crump, writing, I submit it should always be of the same political party, comma, period, comma, as one man's thank you, is not the same as another man's practicable. There, I got it.
Yes, I don't know if there's necessarily the need, and she did email that to me as well. I don't know if there's necessarily the need to ask whether or not that's a friendly amendment, because it is covered in here. The only reason why we would add that clause when practical is, of course, it becomes attendance issues. During the interim structure, and I know we have a lot of freshmen that, so it's kind of like, well, what is interim? We're just still learning this regular, right? And so what happens is in the interim, leadership of both parties, and again, we say joint because we're literally working between both houses now. So it will be some members from the Assembly, some members from the Senate. That would be your joint committee. And of course, leadership basically refers to names to the Legislative Commission that then goes through a process of appointing us to certain interim committees. This new structure also had where we basically had substitutes. So names, this was the first time where we had names available in case somebody was absent, that we could then go to someone else and ask, just like any other substitute or fill-in list, right? Are you available? So there's usually a handful of names. So that, for the most part, is possible. And that, of course, is the goal, is to ensure that if one person isn't able to attend that one particular interim committee meeting, that it will be someone of the same party that's asked if they can attend in their place. And again, there were a few names, so it wasn't just like one per interim committee.
Thank you very much, committee. Any other questions? Assemblyman Hibbets.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of an observation, if I may. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I'm seeing in here a couple of spots where, and you discussed it, but a couple of spots where the workload has shifted from the Legislative Operations and Elections Committee to the Government Affairs Committee. As obviously a member of the Legislative Operations Committee, I appreciate that. As a member of the Government Affairs Committee, I'm not sure if I appreciate that.
I did quote an NRS statute that requires it, so we're just aligning with the statute.
Oh, well, in that case, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Assemblywoman. We will now open up testimony and support. Is there anyone in Carson City who would like to come up in support? Don't rush up. Okay. We'll go to Las Vegas. Is there anyone still there? I don't think so. Okay. Broadcasting, is there anybody on the telephone who would like to testify in support?
Chair, there are no callers to testify at this time.
Thank you very much. Then we'll move on to testimony in opposition. Is there anyone in Carson City who would like to testify in opposition? Seeing none. Las Vegas? Seeing none. Broadcasting, is there anyone on the telephone who would like to testify in opposition?
Chair, there are no callers to testify at this time.
Okay, now neutral. Calling once. Okay, Las Vegas. How about the phone calls?
Chair, there are no callers to testify at this time.
Well, thank you very much. Any final comments, Assemblywoman?
Thank you for hearing this bill. And again, it is basically a cleanup bill because of all those kind of learn as you go experiences that we have. There, Chair Gorlow, there will be additional amendments coming forward as well as we continue to work and improve and make sure we've covered everything as well on the for the structure. And with that, I would like to say these types of hearings don't generally bring out mass crowds or a lot of testimony, but I really do appreciate the Nevadan that the woman who submitted that, who really was working and is engaged and paying attention to what we do up here. So I think that I would just like to acknowledge her and all Nevadans that are always working hard and paying attention and staying engaged. So, because we're here for you all. So thank you. And I was about to close my own hearing, but with that,
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Miller. With that, I will close Assembly Bill 243.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, we will go on to our next agenda item, which is public comment. I could limit you to 2 minutes if you'd like to come up, but hey, take your time. Do either of you want to come up for public comment? Nope. Okay, is there anybody in Las Vegas who would like to do public comment? Seeing none, broadcasting, is there anyone on telephone who would like to testify on public comment?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, our next meeting should be next Tuesday? Yep, next Tuesday, 4 o'clock here. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.